This is a Federal News Network podcast.
The Environmental Protection Agency's Integrated Risk Information System, or IRIS database, is one of the main tools the agency relies on for environmental regulations, containing information on human health effects that may result from exposure to various chemicals in the environment. However, a new report from the EPA's Inspector General says the agency needs to do a better job of who has access to it, or it could be tampered with. For more on the report, we welcome Jeremy Sigel, Supervisory Audit Manager in the Information Resources Management Directorate with the IG's office. Jeremy, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So is it safe to say, am I oversimplifying it if I refer to the IRIS database kind of as the EPA's glossary, so to speak?
That's an interesting term. I mean, it's more of something that, it's a chemical evaluation program. It contains toxicity information and assessment reports for toxic chemicals. So, it's something that the protection of that data and how it's displayed and disseminated is a great ongoing concern that, that needs to be secured. While the IRIS database is mostly internal. I mean, we've seen so many examples of, internal threats that can be used to exploit vulnerabilities. So, our purpose in this audit was to make sure that data is properly secured.
Got it. And so, we'll get to those threats, but just trying to establish what this IRIS database does is it contains the effects that certain chemicals have on human health and the environment. Does that mean it includes, studies and things of that nature as well?
Well, what it contains are assessment reports that they receive, the Office of Research and Development for EPA receives, and then their IRIS program, which includes this IRIS database, that then displays not only the assessment results, but also the scheduling of there's a 7-step process. So sometimes, the rating or the chemical information may not be ready yet, but they at least show, where it is in the process. And if it is complete, then you can go in and see the assessment reports on there.
Got it. Okay. And so then they use those assessment reports to determine whether or not policymakers need to take a look at, regulating them on who has access to the chemicals and where they can be used?
I think it's more of displaying the information so that it can be relied upon for, environmental and any kind of, scientific policy.
Okay, so now let's get more into your wheelhouse here. What kind of
Sure.
IT security is required for such a database by law and, needed just to make it effective?
Every government information system is subject to federal and then their own agencies' regulations. So if, for instance, a lot of the requirements come from the National Institutes of Standards and Technology. And so we'll look at those requirements, specifically for this audit, it was just access control. So, who can access the database, what are the process for approving access. And so they can take these federal requirements, like for instance, say, every password has to expire in 60 days. The agency can either adopt those in their own IT procedures or say, we can't really support that, so we're going to make it 90 days. And this is basically standardized in our IT procedures. So what we looked at was who had access, what are the password settings, who has elevated access, is that access monitored, reviewed on a periodic basis? And that was mainly our thrust for the audit.
Okay. And was there anything in particular that sparked the audit, or was it a part of your regularly scheduled programming?
No, actually, 2 years ago, I was reading an article about the Trump administration was trying to get an OMB mandate that made it so these assessments had to go through White House approval. And I guess this had been done in the past. So the article said it had been done in the past, and it was found that greatly reduced the reliability or integrity of the reports. But the one thing that stood out to me was in this article, it actually mentioned the information system. It stood out to me because they never really mention any, government systems by name in these articles. It's usually, a higher level or, something more important. That stood out to me, and I realized, I then did further research, knowing that GAO had done a lot of reports related to IRIS. And I looked through those reports and realized that none of them touched upon IT security. So I proposed it to our agency, basically with that saying, this is just putting our foot in the door to look at it because I don't think it has been looked at before by anybody. So from that angle, we said, well, let's look at, the most, I guess, the basic, your foundation for any kind of IT security, which would be access controls.
We're speaking with Jeremy Sigel from the EPA's Office of Inspector General. All right, so let's get into the results of the audit and what you exactly found. What were some of the top-level concerns that you have? I know you got into a few of them earlier, but as far as access management goes, what were some of the most egregious red flags that you saw?
I just want to preface it by saying that, this is there's a very limited number of people with access to it. It's mostly just developers and their contractors. However, because it hadn't been looked at and there really wasn't any new access to it in years, we got a listing of the users and looked through it and then said, do really all these people need access? Because a lot of their accounts are still active. And then the agency reviewed them and knocked out, the majority of them based on, saying that, yeah, you're right, they don't need access. But then we went even further and we looked at, the database server that Iris is hosted on and found some password issues. Some of the password settings were a bit lax. Some of them they didn't have control over. They don't want to be too restrictive and lock certain accounts that the database needs in order to function. But just as an overall practice, we saw that there was a lack of monitoring and periodic review. So if we came in and basically saw, why do all these people need active accounts if it's really just displaying these reports that have already been vetted, then they went through and said, okay, they don't need to be active, they don't need to have these accounts, but there really wasn't any purpose to the accounts anyways, so we'll just to be safe, lock them up, which is, was our concern. Knowing that there's really no external access to it, our concern was, well, there still could be internal threats, and those internal threats could be exploited. So that's basically what we looked at was, the entry-level access controls of who has access and, why do they have that access and is it really needed and how often is it reviewed, and all of our findings pretty much flowed from there.
Got it. Okay. And so what are the risks of having, the lack of access controls? I guess this goes back to the purpose of the list again. Is it the kind of thing that somebody could get in there and manipulate if they, if a bad actor ended up getting access, whether internally or externally?
Yeah, I don't know if I would go that far. It's more just because this information is so valuable and so relied upon, any alteration or availability of that data we feel is important. So, even if it's not something an external actor can get to, there's still the internal threat. But also, we've seen examples just recently in the news, like with Okta, that was a service account that was exploited from an internal user just trying to access their account, and then an outside threat getting access to it, because the service accounts, these shared accounts, these system accounts, they still need to have some restrictions to them so that they can't be exploited. Even if, the example that I like to use is you could have a really nice safe, but it doesn't matter if you leave the door unlocked.
Gotcha. Okay, that puts it simply for us who aren't in the IT hopefully. Field. And so it seems as if they were receptive about the external access and the recommendations that you made. Was there any other response from the agency that you can tell us about?
I don't know about the external access part. It was mostly internal, restrictions that they needed to tighten up. But in terms of their response, they concurred with the findings and the recommendations, one of which they've already implemented for password settings. And they basically said that they're going to ramp up their account management. We were happy about that and receptive to it. This report took a long time to come out because, as you can see, it's very tech heavy for a general public. So maybe not as, enticing as most, but in that time, we've been in constant contact with the agency. So they knew the report was coming. They knew the findings. So they had time to develop internal procedures and, in terms of some of the password settings, just, fix that before the report even came out.
All right. Anything else from the report that we haven't touched on that you think is important for the conversation?
Again, it's an internal database, but the things that it distributes, helps display on the website, extremely important. Like this data, we've seen that the main thing that this report was made for is protecting the integrity of valuable chemical data. And we've seen multiple examples that